Good morning, Professor Sudesh. It's a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you for making time to join us on this podcast. Um, my name is Moses, and I host this Investments for Impact podcast. And for this season, I'm joined by Wamboi Nyabero, and you two have met, so no need for introductions there. But I think for the purpose of our audience, it would be great if you could just give us a bit of an introduction and tell us who you are.
Good morning, Moses. Good morning, Mumbai. And thank you for having me in this fantastic initiative and to be part of this podcast. By means of introduction, my name is Sudesh Sivarasu. I'm an academic, a professor in biomedical engineering at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I also direct the Biomedical Engineering Research Center at the University of Cape Town, and I'm the South African Research Chair for Biomedical Engineering and Innovation, and I run a research unit called UCT MedTech. So I'm an engineer by training, but uh, I always say that uh, I'm somebody who's looking for problems to solve. So if I have a good problem to solve, then nothing gets excited to me than a good problem as an engineer to solve it. So I'm a biomedical engineer who loves solving problems. I hope that introduction is sufficient. Moses.
Well, kind of, Professor Sudesh. However, I think you sell yourself a little bit short when you say you're looking for problems to solve. I know I've seen that you have multiple patents and awards, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your patenting and what you've been doing in that innovation space.
Thank you, Babai, for that question. So we have a broad range of patent portfolios. As we speak, we have 23 different patent families from our unit, and then that has led to about 66 applications and a couple of dozens being granted globally. So we have a very wide range of patent portfolios. But we also make sure that we don't focus only on patents because so there are innovations that needn't necessarily be protected by patents alone. So we do extensive work on open source innovation as well. Our unit was one of the first in the country of South Africa to produce a hardware open source uh, uh, medical device, and it's a registered open source medical device. There are lots of medical devices that are open source, but a registered, formally approved open source device in South Africa, the first one came out of my unit. So we have a wide range and a wide variety and wide diversity in terms of the patent portfolios that we currently hold. That being said, as I started by saying that we enjoy the process of solving problems. So we use a fundamental principle called frugal biodesign, which is a optimized engineering design methodology for streamlining medical technologies innovation based on unmet clinical needs. We use that as the basis, and we apply the same principles to solve a problem. And more often than not, we try to solve the right problem, and then with the person who's going to be affected the most in the whole sequence, which is the clinician or the healthcare service delivery sector. And we try to solve the problem for them, which actually will make it much better or easier for it to be uptaken in the healthcare setting. And I hope that responds to part of your questions, Mumbai. And if you would like me to go specific about any of the innovations, because we have a broad range of innovations. Everything is like my baby, so we can't talk one in particular importance. So if you have anything that you would like me to focus on, I'm happy to focus more on it.
Yeah, I was going to say not so much on the innovations, Prof, but when you mention frugal innovation, it kind of triggers me a little bit, and that's because I've heard a lot of people talking about frugal innovation in the sense that when you go to low and middle income countries, you need to defeature and use cheap, technologies or older technologies. What would you say to that?
Frugal innovation is not cheap. Okay, and I think I mentioned it to you previously that I'm busy compiling an article which basically illustrates that frugal innovation is not cheap and it cannot be cheap in medical technology space. So the misconception of frugal engineering being making it cheaper is actually a very short-sighted approach of innovation. So for us, let's take medical technologies in the sense. Medical technologies is in the medical devices, healthcare technology space is a highly regulated space, and there is no compromise on the safety. Yeah, though we produce newer technologies that are more efficacious, there is no compromise of the safety. And I think it's quite essential as an innovator that one understands that we need to prove safety first before proving that the technology is efficacious. And more often than not, especially when you mentioned about in low middle income countries, when innovators talk about frugal innovations, they think about cheaper materials, cheaper processes, cheaper products. It actually doesn't work that way. So frugal innovation is not cheap by any means. Why am I emphasizing on frugal innovation still is the optimized engineering design methodology, which makes sure that you actually still are rigorous in your engineering design, in your engineering testing, to ensure that your technology is safe before you can prove that your technology is efficacious. Okay, let's take an example. A class B or a class 2 medical device, on an average takes about 3 to 4 years. Sometimes it takes about 6 years, and take an investment of about anywhere between 15 to 20 million US dollars, right? Depending on the whether it goes to 510K exempt or whether it goes direct into clinical trials. The cost range varies. If you look at that specifically, the challenge there is that none of that process can be bypassed. The only bypassing that we may get is if we are lucky enough to get to a 510K exempt. Other than that, none of the steps that are involved in the engineering design can be bypassed. What can actually be streamlined, that's why I'm trying to use the term optimized, is if you look at design methodology, if you look at designing a product, there is you go into iterations of design before you evolve into a solution. And very often we choose problems that are solvable, but we need to make sure that we choose the right problem that we can solve. That's the first fundamental principle that we need to follow. Once we know that we solve the problem, we also need to understand, all the W's and H questions. Whom are we solving it for? Why are we solving it for? And how are we going to solve it, right? And what is, you can just put all the design thinking approach on that. And whom are we solving it for? Are we solving it for the patients? And I think that's again a very strong misconception in medical technologies, because in my opinion, patients are beneficiaries of the technologies that we are creating, but patients have limited to no say on what kind of technology and what level of technology gets used on them. They have very limited say in that whole system. So one needs to understand who actually has the say in that entire equation. Then comes the question about the clients. The clients essentially becomes your clinicians, your healthcare service providers, your payers, and they are the ones who are going to decide what kind of technology and what level of what sophistication of the technology is going to be approved for the usage on the patient. And it again goes another step back. We need to understand that medical technologies is not a B2C business, it's a B2B business. It's not a business to consumer, it's a business to business. So we always take, one would need to take this very strongly, that though we design it for the patient, we are not going to sell it to the patient. We're going to sell it to the clinicians or the healthcare service providers or the healthcare fraternity. So keeping that in mind, what would actually make it much more easier for this technology to be translated into the healthcare service providers or healthcare payers? That is quite critical if we look at innovating newer technologies, because who's going to pay is going to be the regulatory and the reimbursement strategies, or the reimbursement protocol, is super critical in making sure your innovation is going to be successful or not. And if we don't have an answer for who's going to pay, what is your regulatory or reimbursement code, it's your technology is going to stay in the shelves. It's not going to take off. So keeping that in mind, if we can optimize the processes on the right problem to solve, the right testing to take place, and right reimbursement strategies to feed in, and then the right kind of clinical evidences that can be generated. More often than not, we don't have local or local population evidence, and if we can create that, if we can create clinical usability results from local population, that's going to be much more relevant in our environment. These are the ones which actually will optimize cost in the longer run. So engineering, so there is no compromise with safety. Frugal engineering does not mean cheaper products. It means it has to be more optimized product. And the misconception of frugal engineering being cheap should be discarded, because that's not how things are going to work. Because somebody needs to take responsibility for the technology to be safe. And unfortunately or fortunately, we as innovators have the responsibility and the purpose of making it safe for the patient. And if you can make it safe, efficient, and cost effective, then that's a frugal innovation.
Professor Sudesh, you're obviously very passionate about biomedical engineering. And before we go into the actual engineering, I would like to know a bit about you as a person. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did that lead you to this path where you are this prolific inventor and academician?
Thank you, Moses. We always jump straight into the actual beat of the discussion. So, my background, I was born in a very remote village in India, a place called Vetuvanam. You might not even find it on Google. It's in southern states of India, Tamil Nadu. So I was born to a humble, working class parents. And if you're an Indian family, you have two options: either you become a doctor or you become an engineer. So, but when I came closer to choosing my degree of education, my father insisted that I do physics. And a very interesting choice, right? Because I loved physics through my uh, career, and he insisted that I do physics. But then I so happened to get an engineering admission in a university very close to my hometown. So I was last of five children. So my parents didn't want me to leave the town; they wanted me to stay with them. So I studied electronics and instrumentation engineering from VIT University, which is one of the leading private universities in India. And so my engineering degree was fantastic. I loved practical stuff. I was I didn't like theoretical stuff. So it was like, I was not the best of the students. I always was outstanding, in the sense teachers would check me out. I was outstanding in the class. So that was my undergrad. And then I so happened I bumped into an opportunity to do a master's uh, at in UK MBA, a fully paid scholarship from the British Council to do an MBA, and which actually had a lot of perks for me to be part of it, because it was also giving me an employment, etc., etc. I was one of the 15 who's got selected in the entire country. It was a very proud moment, and I was very excited to take up a career in uh, business administration. But as life has its own plans, I met with a not a fatal, so almost fatal car accident, motor vehicle accident, and then like. Luckily, I survived it. But what had actually happened was I was put on bed rest for almost like 3 months. So I didn't know what was happening around me. So I was like, my opportunity to travel overseas to do my MBA got lost, and then now I'm looking for for something to do in the interim, right? And as I said, I was always interested in doing something more practical, right? So my parents suggested that I do a master's. Then I went back to the same university where I did my undergrad and asked if they have a master's in VLSI design, the electronic chip design, which was kind of something I thought was very fascinating, and I wanted to do that. And the university indicated that they don't have an option for that currently, but they do have a vacancy in a program called biomedical engineering. And they said you can enroll it in the interim, and if any new vacancies arises, we'll push you into the VLSI. And so, as a stopgap arrangement, I jumped into staying on biomedical engineering just because I wanted to do VLSI design. But that is what is the beauty of fate and or plans, if you were to call, if you believe in a higher power. So I go into this program on biomedical engineering, and then I listen to this lecture on rehabilitation engineering. And this lecture talks about how engineering can be used to better people's lives. And very specifically, there was a catchy phrase that I still remember: let my brain heal your pain, right? So that's something that kind of resonated with me in some way or the other. I thought, like, okay, I didn't realize that engineering so far can be actually used for uh, dealing with people's pain, and that was something that really caught my attention. And the person who did that was my Professor Lazar Matthew, who's still till date my mentor, with whom I ended up continuing doing my PhD, and then we started working together. We kind of still have a long relationship with each other. It's more than 20 years. But why I'm saying this is, the core concept of biomedical engineering is that it could be used for serving people. And I didn't know until then that engineering can actually be used for serving people in a very positive way. And so that influenced my whole viewpoint about what I wanted to do in biomedical engineering. And I didn't want to focus on theoretical stuff, and I wanted to do practical stuff because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of people by doing engineering that actually will heal people's pain, right? So that's the background. But that was in India, and then after my PhD, I got an opportunity from University of Cape Town in South Africa. Um, when I got the offer letter from the University of Cape Town, I went and Googled at that time to see how Cape Town looks like because I had no idea. I just applied for a job and then I got it there. I started a brief academic career in India in the IT University, where I designed a couple of master's and undergrad program in biomedical engineering. Then I moved to Cape Town. Cape Town was a very interesting or a very different space altogether, because Cape Town offered what you want as an innovator. You need freedom to innovate, and that is something that I think you need freedom to fail, right? You need freedom to try out ideas. You need freedom to kind of execute certain things and see if it works or not. And that space was offered for me by the University of Cape Town, and that actually made me a significantly different person than what I was previously. Then another very interesting observation in this journey from being from India to South Africa was the was where the biomedical engineering faculty was actually located. Uh, Traditionally, biomedical engineering was located with engineering faculties, but in Cape Town, the biomedical engineering is actually located in the health sciences faculty, which actually made no sense to me to begin with. But then when I actually entered it, it made all the sense in the world, because you are actually a service provider to the healthcare fraternity. As a biomedical engineer, you're supposed to be a service provider. You're supposed to be working or servicing the healthcare fraternity. And that made it much more easier for me to interact with clinicians, much more easier for me to be as part of the clinical team, not as an external person, like an engineer from an engineering faculty. I was part of it. I'm an engineer from the health sciences faculty, made me seem like an insider. So it opened up access. And it opened up access in the sense we are physically located in a building called Anatomy Building in the Faculty of Health Sciences. And that particular building is where MBCHP or medical students learn their anatomy. And as a biomedical engineer, you always want to test your devices. And you can't test it on patients until you prove safety, but you can test it on cadavers. So we have access to cadavers and we have ethical approvals to do that. So what we do is we basically, whenever we have medical devices that we develop that can be tested on cadavers, we go to the cadaver labs and then test it on fresh cadavers or processed cadavers. And then it gives us the first-hand information on how it would work on a human in almost close to real time. So the transition from being a very theoretical person or theoretical knowledge oriented person to having something more practical, and then to having it more innovative, and then to have the whole rounded way of thinking in terms of creating a solution that can actually be tested and trialed before it can be put on the patient. That transition or the journey took a long time, but eventually when it happened, it was well positioned to be at the University of Cape Town, and that's where I'm currently positioned. And uh, if you ask me, when I met with the accident, 20 years back, whether I would be here, having this conversation about biomedical engineering, I would have said absolutely not, because I wanted to make millions with my business MBA. But now I think the satisfaction of people saving people's lives and saving people's pain, or getting them over that line, is immeasurable. And that's something that, as a biomedical engineer, that one gets. And I want to highlight something that one of the past presidents of the International Federation of Medical and Biological Engineering actually once highlighted or mentioned it in a talk. And I still feel that is a very relevant topic or relevant quote for any aspiring biomedical engineers or aspiring medical technology innovators. He asked me a simple question. If you turn out to be a clinician, and if you are going to be uh, like, say, saving people's lives, how many people's life would you save in your entire lifetime? And I did a simple math. In a 30-year career or a 40-year career, in a single day, if you're able to save 10 people's life, in a year it's about 3,500 people's lives, and then multiplied by 30 or 40, maybe 100,000, maybe a 200,000. That's your lifetime amount of work. But he said, if you are a biomedical engineer, a good biomedical engineer, and if you can make one medical device, and if you can make one good medical device, you can save millions, if not billions of lives. And that changed my perspective on what the impact as a biomedical innovator you can make on people's lives. Because one medical device, okay, I thought that this was very theoretical until COVID struck, right? We were part of a national ventilator project where we made ventilators. And I'm sure all countries, they made ventilators. South Africa is a very special space where they made fast-tracked project to make a standard CPAP solution. We made 20,000 ventilators in less than 4 months. That 20,000 ventilators saved millions of lives. What this president of IFMBE mentioned like many, many years ago came into a reality during COVID. That is an impact that, as a biomedical innovator, MedTech innovator, you can make in the world today, right? And after COVID, the role of biomedical or MedTech innovators uh, has been acknowledged and is just growing stronger. So the coming back again, Moses, the journey is trying to find the purpose, and the purpose is trying to save people's lives. And I hope it continues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Sudesh.
That's an amazing perspective. And it makes me think about, you talked a little bit about design thinking a little earlier. And as we go through school and we're learning about biomedical engineering or any kind of engineering, there's always talk about human-centered design, the voice of the customer, and so on and so forth. How do you work with clinicians? I mean, you are in a very special position where you're in the same building as clinicians. Many biomedical engineers are removed from that that kind of an environment. How would you say that clinicians or healthcare providers should be brought into the process of figuring out which problem to solve, and also in the process of solving the problem?
This is a common dilemma with most biomedical engineers. So let's kind of figure out like the fundamental concept of technology push and demand pull, right? So we as engineers should never do technology push. In certain cases it works. In most cases it doesn't work. It needs to be pulled by the demand, and we need to, as you rightly pointed out, we need to understand who our client is and who our customer is. And clearly, as I mentioned previously, our customer is the clinician and the clinical healthcare service provider fraternity. So the worlds of the clinician and the worlds of the engineers are quite different. It's like the Mars and Venus relationship, right? So they're not matched. So so what does that mean? So let's practically break it down, right? If you're an engineer, if I'm given a problem to solve, right? If I'm given the problem to make this AirPods better, or what I do is I take this and I go think about it, and I have a whole sequence of training. Of I just kind of visualize what are all the problems that can be what optimized in this AirPod, and then I just kind of build on it, and then I create an image, and suddenly I feel like something else can work, and then I try to make that whole. This is how an engineer works. But let's look at what the clinician works. When a clinician goes to a patient, he looks at the patient, they evaluate the test results, they see an X-ray, they see a blood result, they see a, CT MRI scan, and then they decide they want to intervene. They open the patient, fix the fracture, close the patient, and their job is done. The engineer took 6 months to understand this problem, whereas the clinician has everything in their side, and they intervene and they almost finish their whole procedure in about half an hour, right? These are two worlds apart, right? So if you were to say to a clinician to come in and go through this process of or the emotions of a designer, of a design engineer, they would not never appreciate that. And also, if we were to go to a clinician and talk in terms of engineering specifications, they would never understand that. So the fundamental question arises, should they understand? Of course, as a biomedical engineer, I would say it would be lovely for them to understand these technical specifications and give us a technical specification. But on the other side, it's quite important that as designers, as innovators, we understand their language. Their language, they all that the clinician would say in, for example, in a ventilation case, they would say, I want the peak pressure to be at X value, X centimeters, or I want 20 breaths per minute. And how do you convert that is our problem as a biomedical engineer or a medical medtech innovator. The worlds being apart is the beauty of it. It needs to be that way, but we also need a bridging between the expectations between the two worlds. So, from if you go to a clinician will expect a black box solution from a biomedical engineer. They understand that a biomedical engineer or a medtech innovator has a black box that they can put their hands in and make a solution and give it back to them. We need to make sure that we may make them understand that the process of innovation takes time. And uh, a class 1 medical device can take anywhere by 6 months to 12 months. A class 2 medical device can take about 24 months to 36 months, and a class 3 medical device can even take up to 10 years to get full post-market approval. But to make them understand that and to bring them onto this journey as a co-inventor, co-innovator, that's a very important and essential task for a medtech innovator to actually follow. Let me ask you this question, and Moses and Mumbai, if you are uh, if you are imagine that you are a patient, right? And if you're going to go into an orthopedic surgery, and you are going to have your bone fixed, And I, as an engineer, come out and say that this plate actually works better. And would you like to get this fixed in your body? Right. And keep that on one side. On the other side, if a orthopedic surgeon, whether it's popular or not, if an orthopedic surgeon comes in and they say that I want you to use this to fix this fracture, what would you choose? Would you choose me as an engineer opting giving you a suggestion to fix something, or would you choose the clinician's choices?
That's a bit of an unfair question to me because I'm an engineer, so I'll go with the engineer. But you know,
Okay.
I would choose that surgeon.
maybe Moses.
Okay,
Moses,
maybe Moses.
I would
Moses, are
choose
you a surgeon?
the doctor.
Or you choose the surgeon, right?
Yes.
Okay. So so why? Uh, okay. So even if we choose the engineer's perspective, like it's quite important that we reflect on why Moses chooses doctor's perspective or the surgeon's perspective. It's because the clinical credibility, comes from the surgeons. The engineering credibility comes from the engineers, but the ones for fixing this fracture, the clinical credibility or the outcome that we are expecting can only be assured by the clinician. So the clinician choices becomes ultimate in this whole sequence, right? So that's the first thing. Then it's quite important that we as biomedical engineers cannot speak or cannot sell our products to patients or to the consumers. We need to have the clinical team to give the clinical perspective, and that's where the clinical views come in place, and we need to bring them on board to as either the medical experts within the team or advisors who can actually vouch for the product. And it's essential that we actually work with them and not work against them in these sequences, only to make sure that there is an acceptance in the larger market space. Once we have gotten that, then we know that we need to have identify clinical champions. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. We need to identify clinical champions who can actually sell, instead of this which is already proven in the market, to sell this product. We need to identify clinical champions who can actually bring in that clinical credibility. So this is quite essential if you're looking into venturing into newer medtech space, or even optimized, renovated medtech spaces. But that's essential. So the mindset of changing from being the boss, as an engineer, I feel like I'm the boss. I can change the world. I can design I can design a rocket and launch it. I can do that as an engineer. But that's a typical engineer mindset. But from being a innovator mindset to being a service oriented mindset, it's slightly different. So which is like, you design the product, but you do not have the final say on the product. The clinician or the payers have the final say on the product. This has different interpretations, but what I'm trying to say is we need to have champions who can actually take it further. So we as innovators need to, at some point of time, there are only very few low risk devices that we can actually champion by ourselves. For the majority of the 10,000 types of medical devices that's out there, we need to have clinical champions to take them forward. And whether we like it or not, as medtech innovators, we need to work with these clinicians to take our technology forward. And I hope that will response to your question.
Thank you, Professor Sudesh. So I wonder, as an educator, how are you training the next generation of biomedical engineers to build devices with the African context in mind, which we know is very different from other parts of the world?
So that's a great question, Moses. So one of the key elements that we focus on is contextual relevance. Contextual relevance on how the technology can be used and where it is going to be applied and who is going to actually use it. You know, we have designed some fantastic engineering solutions when we put it in the clinics, like for example, a ventilator, right? I'm giving a ventilator because a ventilator is a relatively fresh example. All of us understand it. We are just coming out of COVID, so as a ventilator, you know. the primary the ventilators are designed for pulmonologists, right? So they're designed for intensive care specialists. They're designed for giving support, pulmonary support. But then the operators of these ventilators are predominantly nurses. So, how much of these, how many nurses are involved in your study design, in your people-centric design that you have actually looked into? It's quite important that we understand that. So, if you take a patient's, cycle of care, if a device goes to a patient, we need to understand who are all the people, who are all the stakeholders who are going to be physically involved in that cycle of care. They can be policy wise influencing other things, but then physically involved. So we noticed that for designing a ventilator that actually works well in the ICUs or on the field, it needs to be nurse proof, right? Which means we need to make sure that we understand the requirements of what the nurses are looking to work with. And they are looking for something very simple. They don't have time for reading tens of pages of instructions. You need to make sure that you give them instructions that are very clear, pictorial, and very sequential. There is no very clear arrows on what to follow, what is red, what is green. You got to make sure that those things are very clearly ironed out, irrespective of what's inside your device. The best of the engineering design can be inside the device. But what interfaces, the human machine interface, what interfaces with the machine needs to be explicitly made error proof, right? So we actually educate our students on this. We educate them on what is the sequence that they need to follow, who's in the sequence of cycle of care, and who can actually make errors, right? If you follow the 14971 error analysis, or if you do the FMEA, the failure modes effects analysis, you will understand that there are several pointers within your own device that can actually lead to errors and that can lead to failure. And we need to figure out who are all the stakeholders or the person responsible in each of these point or failure modes, and then try to intervene with that. So coming back to your question, Moses, so what we try to do is we try to give them the contextual relevance on where this technology is going to be used and how, what are all the ways that we can actually make it safer, what are all the ways we can actually make it much more contextually relevant. And then once that is done, it automatically makes it much more easier for the transition to happen. The transition here is that when we have the right problem to solve, as I said in the beginning, the clinical problem, the right unmet clinical need to solve, and then when we know the rigorous process, the engineering design process that needs to be adopted, and then finally, if we know whom we are going to be dealing with, then that covers the sequence of care that technology needs to be adhering to. And then in terms of what we do to our students, we subject them to rigorous engineering design protocols, and then we teach them what are all the requirements of the regulatory bodies. Because there is a misconception that because I'm designing this device, I can test it on myself. No, so you can't, because you're subject to a lot of ethical commitments unless you write it off. So going from a university, it's quite important that we understand the ethical restrictions and how do we actually follow that, and we teach our students how to do that. And one of our bigger challenges of late, which is a good challenge, is that we need to have our devices registered in the SAPRA, which is the South African Health Product Regulatory Authority. We need to register in their clinical trial database before we can even pilot clinical trials. What does that do is it changes the way that we are thinking about designing devices. Now, suddenly, from what was a purely engineering problem, with some clinical insights, has become a very rigorous, regulated environment problem. What does that entail? Is that we need to have ISO 13485 for our medical devices. We need to have at the least ISO 9001. We need to have GMP certifications, and our students need to be GCP certified. So suddenly, what was now a pure master's PhD level problem has now become a industrial level problem, to go through very stringent requirements. And this level of stringency or the level of requirements that is expected of the student, we teach them how to follow this process. Does everybody follow that? I'm not sure. But the ones who follow it are the ones who end up being successful or end up being more closer to the patient at the end of the day. So the fundamental here, Moses, is that we need to have a good framework on what is needed for an innovator to take a problem and solve the problem, test the problem, and then test the solution, and then convert it into a commercial solution. This is a whole sequence. And for you to understand this various levels, like you can look into, we use technology readiness levels, but then there is more. Technology readiness level is one's way of looking at a technology being ready. There is clinical readiness level, there is business readiness level, there is intellectual property readiness level. There is a whole sequence of readiness levels that one would need to focus. And the fundamental is that we need to teach our innovators and our students that these are the things that they need to consider. And they will have an option whether to choose it, whether to follow it or not. But then at least to know, to give them the exposure that these sequences need to be followed for them to take a medical device to the market. In my lectures, I always use a slide which actually has 50 steps of taking a medical device idea into a commercial solution, 50 steps that are essential. At least to have understanding of what step they are in and how do they map through the rest of the 50 steps. It's quite a important and essential learning for as MedTech innovators. So that is something that we try to emphasize, and we try to give our students a little bit of learning, and hopefully that can translate to the rest as well.
And if I may add something, to what you said, Prof. Just in the African context, one of the things that I have found in supporting MedTech innovators, and I think it's a thing that we as engineers do. We're really excited about the technology. We're really excited about how to make things work. And sometimes we forget to, you talked about contextual, having things in context. And the context, for the most part on the African continent, you have to make sure that you're looking at the rural environment, you're looking at the urban environment, you're looking at the fact that power may be a problem and connectivity is almost certainly going to be a problem, and there's going to be dust and all of these things that we have to deal with, or the clinicians and the healthcare providers will have to deal with in the field. And if we're just engineering or designing and developing in a very in our labs and forgetting to go out and see what that context is that it's going to be used in, then I think we're missing the boat. And just adding that to the other contexts that you were talking about.
Absolutely, Mumbai, and you're spot on here, because what may work in a very sophisticated environment may not necessarily work in our rural and remote areas. So we, again, sorry for choosing the ventilator example, but this is an example that actually will fit into the problems that you actually mentioned, the unstable electricity. In South Africa, we are plagued with load shedding, and so when you go to field hospitals, they get really affected by load shedding, and the ventilator supports are sometimes not optimal during the times of load shedding. So one of the key requirements that we actually set in for ourselves while we designed the national ventilators, or as part of the national ventilator project, was to ensure that is UC vent solution that I'm referring to. That is to ensure that we have battery backups that can last for long. So our ventilators could last on an average about 6 to 8 hours without electricity. This can work completely independent without the grid, at least 6 to 8 hours. And we even have had an option to move it to 24 hours. And this was quite very contextually relevant because, South Africa suffers from load shedding, and I'm sure many other African countries also do. And wherever in those cases, or wherever there is a need for transportation and ventilators, we could use something like this, and that actually worked in favor for us. We also do something like you mentioned about heat and humidity, right? So I say as part of combining the previous question that Moses asked, the training to students, I call this as I say that students that they develop a medical device, they need to do to test their medical device. If they are ready to go out, they need to do something called tumble dryer test. So basically, if I design a medical device, I need to make sure that I toss this medical device into a tumble dryer and run the tumble dryer for 20 minutes. And if a medical device, after 20 minutes in a tumble dryer, comes out, and if it still works, or if it still does what it is intending to do, it actually can survive the African condition. Why a tumble dryer test? Because when you go in a motor vehicle in rural areas, the potholes in the roads can give us that up and down, like in a tumble dryer. The heat and the moisture, the humidity, can actually be, in the range of, this is the extreme range of making sure that your device is durable. So in essence, you would need to make sure that it is tested for the extremities, that the dust and heat and humidity extremities that our devices otherwise may not be subjected to. But in reality, it is the case where most of the times that imported devices fail because they are not necessarily designed for these environments. That's a great point, Vimbai.
Sudesh, Africa is not really known as a manufacturing powerhouse, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on how to increase local manufacturing capability. I really like the example that you shared that you were able to build 20,000 ventilators in just about 4 months. So, my question is, how can we improve manufacturing capability in Africa, and what role could that play in increasing the affordability and accessibility of medical devices?
So that's a great question, Moses, and this is a question that a number of countries are trying to solve. And as we are speaking, about a month ago, South Africa launched its MedTech master plan. And one of the key essence of this medical technology master plan is to ensure that we have sufficiently locally manufactured medical devices, increase the number of jobs within the medtech space, etc., etc. But you know, coming to your question on how do you make localization a priority and how do you make it sustainable, I think to create a locally sustainable industry, we need to make sure that we have certain processes in place. And the manufacturing infrastructure that you briefly highlighted, process, it's quite an interesting challenge that we are currently presented with. To have the physical the setup of an industrialized nation, African countries may actually struggle if we are going to do to that level of industrialization that most of the developed countries have. And if we were to create that for each and every African country, it's going to be quite challenging. We may need to look into a hybrid model or a complex hybrid model where we look at not say Kenya, Uganda as a separate market, but see Africa as a market. Try to see, we actually need to create pockets of excellence of manufacturing on the continent, which specializes in each element. And if there is metallic manufacturing, implantable metallic manufacturing, there needs to be a focus area on that, because each country to have its own cross-border manufacturing, I think it's practically impossible, because Africa, the country alone, the market size of each of those countries may not be sufficient. If we are able to tap into the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and if we are able to create centers of excellence of manufacturing in specific or very specified materials or specified sectors of medical devices, then we actually would make sense if we are able to integrate this. And I think, with the advancement in technologies, like with additive manufacturing, for example, metallic 3D printing has actually changed how we look into medical device manufacturing currently. So now we have fully equipped 3D printing, 3D printers that can do medical grade 3D printing from a plastics point of view. And then there are metallic 3D printers that can also be 3D printed in titanium and then subsequently post-processed for usage. And I think we may need to choose. I think the cost-benefit analysis will come into play, whether we can do it in scale, etc. But then, if we were to choose, we don't need. Okay, let me give you another simple example. If you were to set up a foundry, like for specialized for titanium, you're going to look at $100 million investment on that, like the whole titanium manufacturing facility. Do we have a market that can feed into that $100 million investment? That's just one part of the equation. Just look into the titanium manufacturing. Do we have the testing facilities for titanium? Do we have the biological characterization? Do we have the biocompatibility testing facilities? If you add all of this together, you're already looking at a billion-dollar investment for metallic medical device manufacturing. The question is, do we have a market for that? Right? If the market doesn't actually add up, then these investments will not be sustainable and we will crumble. So we need to make sure that what are the priorities that we can make locally, and we need to focus on those, and then the rest can actually be not necessarily outsourced, but like OEMs, like component manufactured and then assembled in respective countries. That can also be. So we need to figure out what would be the model that actually works out, focus and invest on things that would actually work in our context, in our local environment, increase the market, not just your country, to the rest of the continent. Why rest of the continent? Why not the rest of the world, right? If you look at, we have a severe shortage in chipset manufacturing, and we do not have chipset manufacturers in the whole of Africa. So, if we can tap into that, there is a global shortage of electronic chips manufacturing, both for medical devices and non-medical devices. That's a market to tap into. And this actually will, we need to look, one, beyond our countries and into the continent. And we also need to look into making sure that we stand for quality, so it goes beyond the continent to the rest of the continents as well. So we can actually become an export powerhouse if we manage all of these processes. But in the essence, like if we have had to focus, it will be what would be the like in the 5 to 10 year plan. If you were to take something that is worthy of investment, that can get the return on investments, you need to focus on what can be done locally to the market that we are going to be tapping into.
So, Professor Sudesh, you have just touched on things that I'm very excited and passionate about right now, which has to do with collaboration across the African continent, that has to do with distributed manufacturing, that has to do with using our local resources, whether those are the minerals that this continent is very rich with, but also our human resources, and how do we come up with strategies that can best utilize all of these resources that we have, and not focus so much on the challenges, because I hear a lot of people focusing on the challenges in Africa, but I think we have very rich resources that we can use. And, that sort of brings me to the Transforming African MedTech conference in August, which we are really excited that you're going to be attending, because these are some of the conversations that we want to continue to have and come up with action plans. Take experts from across the continent and start talking about where do we start with creating strategies for success, so that we can have a medical technology industry that serves the continent first and then becomes a net exporter, like you said.
I think I'm very excited about the upcoming conference that you're going to be organizing. And I hope that we'll be able to continue these conversations at that conference as well. And back to you,
Thank you,
Moses.
Sudesh. So we always like to give our guests an opportunity to share case studies. So if you look at your career and the work you've been involved in at UCT, are there any great examples of locally produced, designed, and made MedTech devices that you can share with us that have hit the market already that could be an inspiration for early stage MedTech innovators?
Sure, Moses. We've got a few practical examples. As I say, medical technologies take many years before it can actually hit the market. So, one as a medtech innovator, I would advise one to keep that in mind. It's going to be a long marathon before you actually get to see the technology hitting the market. So, that being said. So we have had the fortune of also so we currently are in our fourth startup company and a number of other open source innovations. But our open source innovations are the ones that actually hit the market much sooner. But we made sure that, for example, we developed ptosis crutches for a condition, neurological condition called myasthenia gravis, and these ptosis crutches are used for lifting eyelids, which suffers with ptosis. Ptosis is drooping of eyelids that progresses during the course of the day, and that cannot be surgically fixed. It has to be physically elevated. So we developed what is called UCT ptosis crutches, and these crutches are available in the open source domain. And this is one of South Africa's first open source medical device, fully 3D printable that can fit onto any glasses. So you can clip it onto any physical glasses, and then you can actually pull your eyelids depending on the level of drooping that you have. The solution to this problem costs us only about 10 cents worth of 10 US dollar cents worth of the solution cost is only about 10 cents. But then we found that the people who suffer from it are predominantly people with African ancestry and predominantly with somebody with lower economical conditions or in the lower and middle income groups. So we decided to make it fully open source. So subsequently, what has happened is this technology became a massive hit because we reached out to the myasthenia gravis societies and then they started using these technologies. And currently, this particular technology is being used in 16 different countries. And one of the very few technologies that have had cross-continental impact. We don't know how people get to know about these technologies, but people reach out from very remote parts. US, Australia, France, UK, these are regulars. People are connected with these spaces. But then the farthest that we have actually sent us to somebody from Afghanistan, right? And we understand that there is also the Arab population that has similar issues with myasthenia gravis. So sometimes it is about making sure that your technology is more accessible in these cases. That's one solution that I would always highlight because of its far-reaching impact, and not commercial impact, but social impact. On the other side, we have a technology called Easy Squeezy, which is again a very simple technology for enhancing the pediatric meter dosage inhalers usage. So children struggle with pediatric meter dosage inhalers or the asthma pumps. So we created a very simple mechanism to decrease the force that is required to actuate a inhaler. And actually, a regular inhaler requires about 45 newtons of load, and that is about that is only children with over age of 12 can actually create that 45 newtons load. But then we created a system that can reduce the load from 45 newtons to 12 newtons. What does that mean? Is that children over the age of 5 can actually use inhalers without much of struggle. So this is something that we have created, and then that has clinically tested. A startup company is actually rolling out this technology, and currently we are selling tens of thousands of these units to a global leader in inhaler manufacturer. So I can't disclose more about it, but the point is that has actually hit the market already. We what was a 3D printed mock-up solution is now in a global leader as a solution that can actually translate people's life. The other side is we have actually created a reloadable epinephrine auto-injector, adrenaline auto-injector, and if you know EpiPen, which is the market leader in adrenaline auto-injector or intramuscular auto-injectors, the medication inside the EpiPen expires every 18 months. So EpiPen can cost about $300 per pair. We found that that's not a very sustainable way of when it comes to South Africa, the users generally have less than 6 months for it to use, and then in 6 months the medication expires. The device works, the medication expires. So we actually made a reloadable auto injectors. We have multiple patents on those, and then that auto injectors we have just completed our first in human trial, and so far the results have been very positive. And first in human trial, fully manufactured in South Africa, in Africa, going into it's a class 3 medical device, going into human trial is a significant achievement if you look at the scale of medical devices and the time it takes and the investment it takes. But that's actually, again, with a positive human trial outcome, that's ready to hit the market, very close to being ready to hit the market. So that, again, we also need to understand that, if you're looking at innovations, okay, another example I can say is the Flexigen, flexible hysteroscopic device that ended up jointly winning the Royal Academy of Engineering's Africa Innovation Prize for 2023. And it's a technology that uses a fully controlled tip that reduces the pain that women experiences during hysteroscopy procedures. And then that device has now gone into a commercial venture through a company called MedTech. Again, these are startups that are started by my postgraduate students and researchers, and then they have taken these solutions all the way into a startup company, and some of them into the market, some of them are in the process of going into the market. We need to understand that this process can take very long time, and the investment that is required can also be very high. And maybe the MedTech conference that in August, maybe we may be able to attract more investors who are open-minded in the African. Open-minded about the risk and time sensitivity that goes with medtech innovations, and hopefully we could attract more investments for medtech innovations, because the amount of time it takes is much longer, as I mentioned. So, and the amount of money it takes is also quite longer. The certainty of it going through the regulatory process is very uncertain. So we need to make sure that our investors understand these. But if all of this goes through, we may have the chances of success would be fairly higher. So we as a collective, as a medtech innovators collective, we need to decide what are we going to focus on. Are we going to focus on low cost, low tech technologies, or are we going to focus on hard tech, medium tech, or high tech technologies? And that's where I think the real future of medtech in South Africa lies. So we need to have a clear strategy, and I think with reducing infrastructure around manufacturing, or the requirement for infrastructure around manufacturing, we as Africans are very well poised to take leadership in the medtech space, especially with the advent of software as medical devices, AI coming into medical devices. And I think we've got some brilliant coding skills within our youngsters, and I think we definitely have the potential to change the medtech space continentally and globally.
And I do agree with you 100% that, we shouldn't be stuck in low tech, and that sometimes low tech is the right solution, but we shouldn't be limited to low tech. And, looking at the medium tech, the high tech, software, AI, everything should be open to us. But I think continuing to have those conversations about where to focus, I think is what is going to take us to a place where we can actually accelerate the industry on the continent.
Thank you for your insights, Professor Sudesh. This has been an awesome conversation. I think one of my biggest take homes is that we should not solve a problem that we can solve, but rather that we should solve the right problem. And I'm really excited at the opportunity that we then have as Africans to solve problems that are unique to us. And as we do that, also creating a market for export in other places that might have similar problems. So, with that, we close this discussion, but not entirely. We're just pressing on the pause button so that we can pick it up at the Transforming African MedTech Conference in August. And we really, really look forward to seeing you there, Sudesh. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we're going to put you to work because you have so much expertise, experience, and knowledge that we really hope that you can share with others at the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mumbai, and thank you, Moses, for this amazing opportunity and for this engaging conversation. And I look forward to the conference in August.